time of trying to figure out my own training schedule and figure out how to shorten the curve on training and get people to have a better balance of real skills, real world skills, I've noticed a few things. And it wasn't until I read Dustin Solomon's books that I really realized that I wasn't the only one thinking that we had a huge deficiency in training, because there's been some horrible neglects that have actually cost lives, apparently, according to his books, and it's also caused conflicts to go bad, and it's something that's absolutely dangerous for civilians, in my opinion, because of the demands that we have as far as like our reaction to certain situations or whatever. So the problem is that we have some things that are overemphasized and some things that are almost completely neglected, unless you go to some things like force-on-force training, or you actually do go through some law enforcement training, or even special forces training. So I do recommend that you check out Dustin Solomon's books. Building Shooters, I lent that to a friend, so Building Shooters is one of them. On training, the essays that he wrote on that, in the new book, endorsed by Kyle Lamb, or not necessarily endorsed, but he read it and he commented, so he gave his own testimonial. It's on the cover. Hitting in combat. He talks about how to get people hitting in combat with minimal training using neuroscience, and this was something that I kind of paralleled and figured out as well, that we have done things wrong from my own studies of neuroscience before I even read his book. So it was just kind of interesting that I'm not the only one who's seen these problems. So anyways, this is kind of a new system that's kind of come up, or a new training idea that's come up, but I recommend you read the books. They're definitely worth the read. Totally changing the market, I think. But anyways, I'm going to explain why I feel these skills have been overemphasized, and this isn't just based on, my experience. Some of it is my experience, my combat experience, but also it's from, testimonials from officers and stuff that you actually see in the real world, some problems. And it does come down to training too, but you can't just throw more hours of the same training that's failed people and expect a different result. That's a problem with hating on law enforcement. You kind of got to change the way that they're trained, right? So anyways, the whole idea is that we are building skills that become procedural memory with firearms. That's why we conduct repetitions. That's why we get training, and then we do things over and over and over again, because the idea is that you do it over and over and over again because it should become second nature. However, the problem with law enforcement and civilians in general is they're not actually spending all that much time on the range, so we have to really attack the training in a way that goes towards neuroscience. But even the people that are practicing over and over and over again until it becomes second nature, they're still failing, because those skills are never combined with things that are actually being used in the real world when these situations are happening. So what's the overemphasis and why is it bad? Even if you're really skilled, times are overemphasized in drills and courses of fire. And here's how that's a problem. In drills, it's outcome-based training. Even if you're saying, well, I want you to take your time and I want you to do it effectively, I don't want you to worry about the time necessarily, I want you to do it right. Well, you're still having outcome-based training because you still want rounds on the target, you want them to be in some grading zone or whatever. The problem with that is it's arbitrary. You're reacting to a beep. You're reacting to an initiation that is artificial. You're not reacting to organic stimuli, such as an actual declared threat to you. So you could have some guy who's 250 pounds, and I, $150, am saying I'm going to kick his ass. Do you really think that person's going to be threatened? No, but most of the targets are my size profile, and they're about as wide as I am. And supposedly, that target is a threat. There's no context. There's no context being drilled in. There's no observation and decision-making. And there's no actual threat being presented. It's arbitrary skills being drilled. And there's not even a mind game going on to actually initiate a problem. It's just threat or gun or contact or something like that. So, or just a beep. Next is course of fire. So you run through these arbitrary courses of fire. Okay, run to this stage and then you're going to shoot 3 rounds, and then you're going to go to this stage, shoot 3 rounds. you're not reacting to stimuli, you're simply reacting to the round count or the completion of certain things, and then knowing that you shot 3 rounds or you hit a certain amount of times, then you move on. That's a pre-planned course of fire. In the real world, these things do not happen. You have to react to stimuli. This is a failure. This is a failure because you're playing a game. And a lot of people are like, well, it works. It might work, sort of, but in general, you will still see a failing. And the people that are saying it works and it works and it works are people that are in a team setting a lot of times, like the military. I've been saying this for a while. The military is in a team setting. So you have all these people that are observing and have to make these decisions. And whoever acts the fastest is typically the one that initiates the security. And maybe somebody doesn't react. And so you have a failure of observation, or you have a failure of decision-making, freezing and stuff, what they talk about in the book Left of Bang. What a lot of cops will talk about is a freeze response to things, even though they're really skilled with firearms. Great example, the Miami-Dade shootout. You had an officer who was SWAT trained, and he had all these hours, he was a really good shot, and blah, 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 blah. When it came time to actually applying his skills, he shot both of his magazines off, and he hit like 1 round. And he was not that far away. But because of his raw training to basically just pound a bunch of rounds, he followed that. But it wasn't actual aimed rounds, and he didn't make the decision or observe that he wasn't really in a threat. So he wasn't really able to decide and observe and go through that OODA loop process. It was basically raw skill, panic mode, basically. So he did have procedural memory, but not procedural memory that could be pulled up in combination and, you know, utilized properly. So that's the problem. So the next is just general raw skill, like I just talked about. We're talking about malfunctions, corrections, and stuff like that. You'll see people, like I just explained, who have a lot of raw skill on a flat range, people who can do impressive stuff and Jerry Mitchell-like targets all day or whatever. But when it comes time to actually going into the real world, their ability to even observe a threat is bad. Or they don't even pull out their gun in time to save their own butts from getting kicked, or whatever the case may be, because they don't observe a threat. And also, they can't decide because they don't know when they can actually act, because they don't know legally if it's really good to act or just back off or just to delay it. It's like hoping that the thing will go away. So they don't have training in combination with the real world. These raw skills are not combined in the real world. Officers have dealt with this where they think, okay, well, if this person, you know, even acts like they're gonna come up to me with a fist or whatever, even though I could take them down, I'm just gonna pull out my gun and shoot them, because it's the easiest way. There's no real decision making. There's no calculation. There's no real observation and good decision making. It's just you have a red line and that's it. And some people are fine with that. That's on you. You got to deal with that in court. I'm not really you know, saying either way is necessarily bad, but I think that the training has been wrong to say, okay, threat. Well, what's a threat to you? Have you actually observed something that actually has made you feel like you are in fear for your life? Do you know that context? Can you actually replicate that in your training? That's where force-on-force training comes in, and that's where we're kind of getting away from this and just talking about the neglected stuff and how that can kind of be implemented. So, realistically, force-on-force training is the closest thing that we can get to actually being able to apply these overemphasized skills and seeing how they act, how they are used in a real-world setting. And this is where we actually see that times are not actually important, and raw skill are not actually all that important. They are important. You need to be able to reload efficiently and in a timely manner. However, this half-second reload time and this split-second draw time is overemphasized because it's arbitrary in nature, because there's no stimuli, there's no decision-making, there's no OODA loop process going on here. There's no real stimuli saying, I'm about to fight for my life. What do I do? What can I do? You're not calculating. And so force-on-force training can introduce this. at least an element, at least the observation part, where you actually are observing things, and you're like, okay, this person's being a threat, and you might actually be scared because they might actually have a firearm too, and that can actually at least put you in fear of harm. And so it can test your time, but it's also testing your ability to make the decision, in a manner of speaking. However, escalations of situation is really the big deal, because we have to make a decision at every point of that escalation in a situation. Someone's talking shit, and we have to decide what to do. Is that talking shit a real physical threat? We have to make that decision. What do we do now? Are we going to try to boost our ego by talking shit even better? Or are we going to, just keep our cool and actually, stay within the law? And then, once it's ramped up to a threat of violence, we need to make a decision on what we're going to do. Are we going to start making distance? Are we going to stand our ground? Are we going to start upping our verbal judo? Are we going to actually, start with dialing a call saying somebody's threatening us and get on dispatch? What are you going to do? I'm not saying either one is right. I'm just saying that we need to make decisions all throughout the course. We can't just stand there and then it's like, okay, you cross the red line, boom. That's bad, and that's typically what force-on-force training leads to, is a lot of people arbitrarily go, okay, dude, I don't want to fight, oh, I don't want to fight. Oh, tango, sidestep, bang. And you'll see that in a lot of force-on-force. It's actually kind of funny. However, there are some police departments that are doing a great job where, in my opinion, they're doing a great job because they're actually sending them into situations blind, very realistic scenarios where they're actually going on a call with very little information from dispatch on this training, and there's a situation set up and there's like an anonymous call. For example, they're told, okay, there's an anonymous tip that there's a DV on, 1st and 2nd Avenue, at the corner of 1st and 2nd Avenue, but they go down to that simulated training area, they seek out what's going on, and they just run through their training. And then something may happen or something might not happen, but they run through their training and they might get a surprise or they might not. However, a lot of times what they'll notice is people that have been through traditional force-on-force, they're always expecting to have to pull out their gun and engage or do some kind of force. But typically, this is where they're actually tested on their training. It'll be random. Some people might be thrown through force-on-force, where they actually have to pull out a gun or escalate or something like that. And for the most part, people have to escalate to some form or another. But really, it's going to be performance-based, where how well do you handle the situation? Do you step up and use your badge or if you're security, use your badge as a way of cooling people down? Or are you going to threaten somebody as a civilian, saying, okay, maybe in a force-on-force for a civilian, it's very similar, where you're just going and getting a beverage, you're sitting down, and you're observing a conflict. Are you going to get in on that conflict, or are you going to dial 911 and be silent until something actually happens? The decision's up to you, but it's performance-based training, and then afterwards you're going in blind, but you don't necessarily have to fire a shot in order to do it, but you do have your gun on you, and you do have SIMRINs in case this situation goes bad, but it's always a surprise. That is very realistic, where you have to react to stimuli. But though it's a training environment, you are still tested on your ways to respond to a relatively organic situation, but it's very close to reality, and it's pretty much as close as you can get. So sometimes things may go bad, other times maybe not. But that's really the problem, is a lot of training does not do that. And yeah, that would be exhaustive amounts of hours to do that, right? Not really. Not really. Dustin Solomon actually covers that, and in my reading, my understanding of neuroscience, it really does not take much to take raw skills and turn them into procedural memory if you start from the get-go doing it right. It does not actually take that much time. Combined, really. So, anyways, that's really the problem, is the raw skill is not mixed with reality all that well, and so you have problems where people are drawing their gun or missing in general because they're not used to combining that raw skill with stress. So they're not making a decision, and they don't really have that red line. They've never really had to encounter that real stress with combining that skill. It's always been a game, or it's always been just for fun. Imagine playing your favorite sport as if your life depended on it, but you don't play that sport very often. Imagine if it's like a Saw game or whatever. So, anyways, that's really what we're doing with firearms, and it's kind of sad. But anyways, that's my little spiel for how training's kind of failing you. But anyways, I appreciate you guys watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and you guys have a good one.